the Instructor podcast with Terry Cook, talking with leaders, innovators, experts and game changers about what drives them.
Welcome to the Instructor podcast. As always, I am your splendid host, Terry Cook, and I'm delighted to be here, and even more delighted that you have chosen to listen. And if you are listening for the first time, welcome on board. And if you are a regular, welcome back, because this is a show we give you the information and inspiration to help you become an even more awesome driving instructor. And today is no different. We've got a brilliant show where we're looking into specifically working with people's parents, joined by the amazing Julie Hazell, who talks to us about her online course, which is specifically aimed to help parents teach their kids to drive. We discuss the impact that can have on driving instructors, and we talk about what we can do to be better communicators with parents, if you like. The other thing I'm going to mention about today, you may notice that my audio is slightly different. Simply because just before I started recording this, my microphone broke and I've had to revert to my spare. New one is on the way, and I hope this isn't too off-putting for you. But just before we dive into the show, I want to remind you to make sure that you are subscribing and sharing this show. So wherever you're listening, make sure you click subscribe so it drops into your feed whenever I release these episodes, or, as I did midweek this week, the bonus episodes of short lessons. This one was with Shabnam Raja, brilliant episode around self-sabotage. So if you're subscribing, they'll drop into your feed straight away. And if you're feeling nice, go and share the podcast, share it with all your friends, share it with your associations, all that kind of stuff. And if you're feeling extra generous, leave us a nice little 5-star review as well. And if you hang about to the end of the show, you will hear me read a few more of my reviews over there. But for now, let's get stuck into the show. And we're now joined by the ever delightful Julie Hazell. How are we doing, Julie?
I'm fine, thank you, Terry.
I'm delighted that you joined us today. You're someone that I've been talking to, having on the show for probably almost a year now, and I don't think we've struggled to get us dates matched up, but it's great to get you on eventually. So the first question I'd like to ask everyone that comes on the show is just tell us a little bit about you and a little bit about what you do.
Okay, so, I've come from a family of driving instructors. My dad was one, and I have 2 step-siblings who, back in the day, were also driving instructors. My dad actually, back in the day, ran a fleet of cars. My mum did all the admin, so it was very much a family business. So I've been brought up really with road safety and driver training. And I've actually qualified twice as an instructor, once the first time in 2003 and then again in 2018. So when I qualified in 2003, obviously I went through the old training system. And unfortunately, it was a year after my dad died, so he never actually saw me follow in his footsteps. But then after that, several years after that, we moved to Dubai and we lived there for quite a few years. And so during that time, I didn't keep my license current. And then when I came back in 2018, I had a 17-year-old daughter who wanted to learn to drive. And even in pre-COVID, trying to find a driving instructor at that time was virtually impossible. And I didn't have a lot of money. So I decided to dust off my old notes and start to train her myself, which I did do, but it wasn't easy because I was looking at YouTube videos and goodness knows what to try and work out what to do, what had changed, because I'd been away for 15 years. But anyway, long story short, I did give her, she did have some lessons with a local driving instructor because I was worried that I might teach her something or not teach her something that would cause her to fail a test. But anyway, she went on, she passed her test first time and she was a 0 hero, which I was quite pleased about. So after that, it kind of reignited my passion for the job. And I decided to retrain. And I think now it puts me in quite a unique position because I went through the old system and then obviously did the job for a while, so got some experience and then came back, went through the new system. And so now I feel like I've got kind of up-to-date training, but I've got the experience of perhaps a seasoned instructor as well. So that's me really. that's where I'm at the moment.
Well, I mean, you did miss one thing off there, and that's a big thing I've got on to talk about today, which is the work you're doing with people's parents as well, with your learners' parents. But
Yeah.
before we dive into that, I like to ask everyone this question because it always puts them on the back foot a little bit. The tagline for this show is that I speak to experts, leaders, innovators, and game changers. So which one of those, or ones of those, do you think you fall into?
I'd say probably two. I think as professional driving instructors, I think we should all be looking at ourselves as experts. But having said that, not to be complacent with that. So I think professional career development is a very important part of our job. And I think especially as many of us, we work as independents as well. So it can be quite an insular occupation if you let it. So I think there's a lot to learn from our peers. There's a lot to learn from other industry leaders. And I certainly make professional development part of my weekly routine. I think also, given what you've just touched on now with regards to my online courses, I think I like to see myself as an innovator as well. And that came from COVID, really. When we were all in lockdown, I was inundated with parents phoning me up wanting driving lessons. Of course, we had that period where we couldn't teach anyway. And, over that time, as you know, everybody's been turning 17. There's still a backlog. People are still queuing up for driving lessons. So while I had that downtime, I started to think, well, what can I do to help these people now? Because they don't want to wait. They've also got the time. They're off work as well. For many people were if being furloughed and things. So what I did was I took an online course to teach me how to build online courses. And once I'd done that, I started off quite small. I just did an online course just to teach parents how to teach a manoeuvre the parallel park. And then after that, I went on to do a bigger course, which basically teaches parents how to take their teenager from knowing absolutely nothing about driving up to basic roundabouts. So not intended to teach them to become driving instructors, not intended to replace traditional driving lessons, but I think it's very much an extra tool, a support system to help parents improve the quality of their private practice, really. Because most parents at some point will go out and help their teenagers in the car. So it helps them and it helps us if we're not spending half the lesson undoing the bad habits that have been taught.
Yeah, I noticed the sort of the tagline on your LinkedIn page is "I help parents of learner drivers to not pass on bad habits in private practice," and I think that really resonated with me because it's something that I probably don't get as much now as I used to, but I used to get it a lot where a student might have a few weeks off for some reason, whatever the reason might be. But during that time, they'd go and, do some stuff with the parents and they'd come back, oh, I've learned how to do this, let's say. And then they'd tell me, and it's like, oh, I remember one lad saying, I've learned how to do it. I do every roundabout in second now. I'm like, really? Why do we do it in second? What if you need to stop? So is that something that you were seeing a lot, do you think? And that's one of the things that spurred you on to do it?
Yes and no. I agree with what you're saying. I think you can always tell when you've had a lesson and you've left them at a certain level, and then, as you say, maybe they've had a couple of weeks break and they come back to you, and straight away you can see that they've been out with mum and dad. They're now confused about what they're doing. Mirrors are usually pretty poor when they come back because, of course, parents, I think that's one of the biggest things to drop off in private practice, because I think the parents are putting so much focus on the road and they're just so grateful that they're still alive at the end of the session, that they're not actually watching what son or daughter is doing in regards to mirrors. I also find that when they've been out with parents, they get confused about signals around parked cars, because a lot of parents will tell them, you need a signal to pass a parked car, and then, of course, I teach that we don't. Not most of the time, obviously. There's nothing black and white, never say never, but more often than not, you don't need a signal. And then they're cycling through the gears, so they're not doing the block changing. So those are the things that I think you can tell immediately when they've been out and spent time with mum and dad. But I think it was more when parents were phoning me up during lockdown, and I kind of started to get this idea. So when they phoned me up, rather than me saying, no, sorry, don't have any space, or can't take you at the moment, we're not legally allowed, I was kind of developing that a bit further and saying, well, I've got this plan. What do you think? And the feedback that I got from that was two things, really. One, that the main thing that they were worried about passing on their bad habits, so they were a bit concerned about doing it. And also patience. They were worried that they wouldn't have the patience to do it. So, but I think a lot of times with patience, I think the problem there, it's not actually having the patience, it's not having the skills to manage a potentially stressful situation. But if you can manage the situation, well, then your stress levels are lower, their stress levels are lower, and the tension is not the same. I mean, obviously, you can have a different dynamic with a parent and a child than you would with an instructor. But I mean, it can be managed. I did it with my own daughter. I wasn't qualified at the time when I taught her, although, admittedly I was previously, but, my skills were 15 years rusty. So I think that's really where that came from. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. And it's just making me think when you mentioned about teaching your own daughter. My stepson's 17 next year, and he says he wants to come to lessons with me. And I've told him that he will be having his first 20 hours with someone else, because he will just assume that because I'm telling him because he's my stepson, not because he's learning to drive. So, but I mean,
sorry to interrupt, Terry, but this is the other thing actually that I found with the parents, with the feedback from the course, is that they said the same thing, that because mum and dad were teaching them through me almost. I think one of the students said that it felt like I was teaching him, or mum was teaching him by proxy. So I think they take on board what mum and dad tell them a little bit better if they know that it's come from someone that knows better than mum or dad.
Yeah,
if you know what I mean.
No, that makes sense. I mean, the other question I wanted to ask you there, because like we both kind of spoke a little bit about the negatives of being taught by parents. Have you come across any positives? Because the big one that I see, a big positive is, for me, is the experience on the road, because they tend to not spend as much time talking through stuff, so they do just get thrown into some of the situations. And a lot of the time that experience, they will experience more random situations. They may never come across an ambulance while they're on a lesson, but they might come across one while with their parents. So have you come across any other positives?
I think, as you say, I think any experience is good experience. The more varied opportunities that they get to experience things has got to be good for them. I do think sometimes parents underestimate, again, it sounds a bit negative again, but I think sometimes parents do underestimate what the student's capable of, and puts them in situations that perhaps they can't deal with, and then sometimes I have confidence issues when they've had a scary experience, and then you have to kind of rebuild that confidence a little bit. But when you're working closely with the parents, I tend to give them the brief as, right, this is what we've done this lesson. This is what I'd like you to practice next. Be mindful of where you're going. Give them a better idea of what the skill set of the student is, to try and avoid that. Because I think it can be a problem to confidence if they get put in situations that they can't cope with. But like you said, it's also a steep learning curve. Sometimes they do, but they learn very quickly, and sometimes it's quicker to learn from your mistakes.
Yeah.
Than have a more controlled environment.
Yeah. I think just before I come on to the course itself, because it does fascinate me genuinely, I'm intrigued sort of the relationship you have with parents, because you don't just offer the course. There's other stuff you've got out there as well. Now you've got Facebook groups and sort of demo videos that you do. And I'm assuming that even if someone doesn't sign up to the course, you're still happy to work with the parents and talk to the parents and so on. So I'm just intrigued, as someone that's that's prioritised this side of learning to drive, how you found the reception from parents and that side of it?
All very positive, actually. The majority, because don't forget, this isn't for every parent. You know, some parents, they're not committed. They don't want to put the work in. You know, maybe they've got the money. They're happy to just pay for your professional services, job done. But the parents who genuinely do want to support the learning, I think they're very respectful. They're very interested to learn how to do the job properly. Because I think, like me, when I was teaching my daughter Nia, you're so worried as a parent that you're going to say something wrong and do something, tell them something wrong, that could end up then costing them their driving test because of something you said incorrectly, or you didn't teach them at all because you didn't know to teach it. So I think, they're very receptive to any advice. And what I've had I say a lot of success. I've only done it 3 times, but I've had 3 scenarios with parents whereby we've had this situation where, say in a 4-week period, they'll do lessons for 3 weeks, and then on week 4, I'll come in and I'll do an assessment. We'll do some troubleshooting. I'll fix some problems, whatever needs doing in that lesson. And then we'll make a training plan moving forward, which I then discuss with mum or dad. And I do that either face-to-face, or I'll send them a detailed WhatsApp message. I also have an app on my phone that I share with my students where I can communicate, and I give detailed lesson notes in that. And then we make a lesson plan moving forward, a training plan moving forward. They go and do those 3 weeks. They do what's required. They can contact me on WhatsApp. We can have a conversation. We can have phone calls. And then again, the assessment continues in for example, week 4. And I've done that 3 times now, and all 3 students, I would say, they progressed at the same rate as they would have done if they'd been exclusively with me in a traditional setting. They had possibly, as you said, more of a varied experience because they were going out more than those 1 or 2 hours a week that they'd have been doing with me. And all 3 of them passed their test first time with less than 3 driving faults.
I find that interesting. I mean, from my personal perspective, the bulk of my students tend to be mid-20s, so I maybe don't quite get the same scenarios as you, but I do obviously have some that are 17, 18, 19, and I find it fascinating seeing the difference in how parents approach it, because, as you said, there are some that are just like, okay, you do the job. And that's not a negative thing. That's just the approach I want to take. Others are really involved in the training of them in terms of they take them out for lessons. And then others are more involved in working with me and just getting my feedback and stuff. And I see online a lot of people complaining about parents. And my experience is always that when I communicate with them, if they want that communication, because some don't, but when I communicate and actually talk to them, they're actually really easy to work with. You know, if you keep them updated, I think the problem sometimes comes is when you suddenly tell them 2 weeks before the test that their kid's not ready or something like that. But if you keep them updated and explain the situations off, I think that what you're saying there, sort of the idea of 3 weeks off, 1 week on, that intrigues me. But I'm also going to play devil's advocate slightly, because I can imagine a lot of people listening to that and thinking, well, how are you getting paid? If you're only then doing that once a month, are you not taking food off your own table, sort of thing?
Well, no, because it means I can take on more students. If I know that I've only got, that one student, I'm only seeing that one student once every 3 or 4 weeks. Well, then I can help more people, and that was the whole point of this in the beginning, because in an ideal world, when you're in business, when you've got people knocking on your door for work and you're having to turn them away, it doesn't sit well. So there has to be a way, or at least that's what I was thinking when I started going down the online route. There has to be a way to help more people. And if they're doing more for themselves, then they don't need so much one-to-one with me, but it means then that I can have more students on my books.
Yeah.
So I am not short of work. I mean, I do plenty of, traditional lessons as well. But no, I mean, it works. And I get a lot of satisfaction helping the parents and talking with the parents. And as you say, when you communicate with them and you're all on the same team, and they see it as it's a team effort between the three of us, really, the student, the parent, and myself. It's a coach. That's what our business is now. We're coaches. We're not teachers anymore. So it's all about coaching and helping them to help themselves, really, and to learn. It doesn't work for everyone.
No.
But,
I think that's the important thing. It's not a one-size-fits-all, is it? But out of curiosity, so sheer curiosity, have you got a preference? Do you enjoy the parents that are really heavily involved more, or do you enjoy it when you're just left alone to your own thing, or do you like the mixture?
I like being involved with the parents, yes. I think in some ways you feel less responsible. It is very much a team, a team effort. And it's nice to see how pleased they are with themselves, and the progress that the student's making. And I know the three students that I was telling you about, the last one, she actually took her test in her own car as well, because that's one of the downsides, I would say, that because they do so much training in their own car, they're not very comfortable in yours. So I've found with the three examples that I gave you, two of them took their test in their own car. So there was only one that took in mine, and I ended up giving lessons in their car instead. But for me, that wasn't a problem, because once they've got to a certain level, I'm comfortable with no dual controls.
Just taking a slight pause in the show to give a big shout out to John Watson. John is the latest person to sign up to the Instructor Podcast Premium, and he's now got access to almost 70 exclusive shows, including the most recent one that I put up, which is called Teaching Terry. Now, these are ones where, with the permission of both parties, I have taken a training session where I have been trained, I have been coached, however you want to phrase it, and I put that recording up to see other people get to see me being coached by a specialist. So, something a little bit different over there at the minute. But there's a whole host of shows and a whole host of discounts available there as well. But just a brief mention to anyone thinking of signing up, if you sign up in November, all November sign-up fees will go towards the Big Learner Relay. So any new sign-ups in November will have their sign-up fee donated to the Big Learner Relay. Speaking of the Big Learner Relay, make sure you are signed up to the podcast. You'll find a link in the show notes for this, or you can go to wherever you listen and search for Big Learner Relay. So go and check out the podcast I'm doing over there. And if you're feeling even more generous, donate. You can find links in the show notes on the website or at biglearnerrelay.co.uk. But for now, let's dive back into the show. I hate to come to the sort of the negatives, or the perceived negatives, I should say, with this, but I suppose the downside to that is that when people are taking their own car, you obviously don't get the credit on your on your badge. Is that something that you're concerned about at all, or does that not faze you because your priority is the student?
A little bit of both. It can go on your badge. You only need to give the student your ADI number. They take it to the test centre, and it can go on your badge. So that's not something I've done personally, but I think that can be managed quite easily if that's a problem. And I went off target a little bit, actually, with the story that I was telling you about the girl in her own car. But once she took the test and she passed, and Mum was over the moon. Mum has to take a lot of the responsibility for that, that teenager passing. Yes, it was all supported by me, but they were the ones that did the work, really. But she posted it all over her Instagram. She, thank you, Julie. My logo and everything was posted all over her Instagram, and they certainly gave me plenty of credit for all the support that I gave them, even though it was Mum that took her there on the day. But no, from the badge side of things, if that's a problem, just give them your badge number.
It's interesting you say that about the sort of the mum sharing the stuff there, because as I said, a lot of my students are a little bit older, but what I tend to find is that the teenagers that pass, they might put a comment on that pass picture you put out, but they're not great at sharing your stuff. But the parents of the teenagers are awesome. I'm always seeing my name chucked up in Facebook groups. I'm like, who's that person? Then I'm like, oh, it's so-and-so's mum. Right, okay.
Yes, yeah.
What?
And I think when they've done it themselves as well, they're even more inclined to want to bragging rights.
Definitely. And I think that's the other thing, again, that works in your favour, like you said. If you're almost forging that relationship with their parents and whether they take them in their own car, your car, whatever, they are going to feel like they can tag you in stuff more and that they will share you because so-and-so passed in my car, but Julie supported me by doing this. She didn't insist on having 40, 60 lessons. She did this. So it's almost like an alternative service you're offering, which I think is... I'm all for alternatives, let's put it that way. Just before we kind of move on to the online side of it then, I think there's one more question around that, and I might throw this on you a little bit, so apologies in advance, but I'm just wondering if you'd have any advice for other instructors, because it's until maybe the last couple of years, I kind of steered clear from parents. I was like, I'll work with your student, I'll work with your son, daughter, that's it. I talked to that, I wasn't the best at dealing with that. And I'm sure that I'm not the only one that's been like that. So as someone that does that regularly, is there any advice you would offer to ADIs for dealing with parents?
I would say communicate more with the parents, whether whether the parents want to be hands-on or not. And this is, I mentioned earlier that I have an app, which I think a lot of instructors do have now for managing their diaries and everything else. But I think the app is a really good way of communicating as well. Both with the parents and the students. And I always write up my lesson notes. I always keep a good progress record there. So at any point, if I've got a parent with a problem, I just revert them back to the app. Have a look on the app. The parents can have a version of it as well. So we're in constant communication there. And then if there's any question mark over whether the student's test ready or not, well, then the parents can see for themselves how far along they are in their training. They can see what's gone on in the lessons. And I think the more open you are with the parents, the less conflict there is. Because I think with anything, if you're not approachable and you're just this faceless driving instructor that takes large amounts of their money every week, and they don't really know what's going on in the lessons, you almost become the enemy. And then they get to a point where they think little Johnny should be ready for test because he's had X amount of lessons, but they've got no concept of what stage little Johnny's at and what problems little Johnny's had. But I think if you communicate with them, I think it just makes my job, so much easier.
I love that everyone refers to us as little Johnny. I don't know where that comes from. I think I just say thingy, or I don't know. All right, the online course then. You spoke before about it being like it's not a be-all, end-all. It's not teaching parents how to be instructors, and it kind of goes up to the level, I think it's like basic roundabouts. Just want to give us an idea of what's contained within the course, and is it kind of a medium, if you like, in between in between parent and instructor, or?
What do you mean by medium?
So, obviously, like you say, you're not training them to be instructors, but is there a bit of are you encouraging them to coach, for example?
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yes. I mean, it's when I was teaching NEA, the thing that the biggest problem that I had is if you go on YouTube or you Google anything, there's videos of driving instructors driving. Just do this, but it doesn't. So it's aimed at the student to show by demonstration what the student should be doing. Now, I'm not saying that demonstration doesn't have its place in teaching, because it does. But if it was just that simple to learn to drive, well, then we would be out of a job, wouldn't we? Mum and dad can just sit in the car. This is what you do. Watch me. Now you do it. There's more to it than that. So the course really starts off, I mean, it's 5 modules. The first module is just all about setting them up to make sure they're legal, making sure they've got the right insurance, making sure they've got L plates properly positioned, getting the parent to get that instructor's mirror. You'd be amazed at how many supervising drivers do not have that mirror. So things like that. So getting themselves set up to be safe. Then module 1 is basically a controls lesson. And I don't hold anything back on that. I tell them in video format exactly what I would tell them if I was sat next to them in the car. And then I give mum and dad some strategies for how they'll help them find the clutch control, getting them to do certain things while the car's stationary that they might not think of doing, that they'll, like changing gear, for example. The first time they change gear is when they're actually on the road moving, whereas they could actually keep themselves a little bit safer and let's kind of do a dummy run of that while we're stationary before we actually get wheels rolling, so they can at least feel the placement of the gears and things. So little things like that maybe mum and dad wouldn't think about to do. So those sort of insider tips. I share a little bit of what I call instructor lingo, because again, as you know, we need to be able to say things quickly on the road. So just a few key phrases to get them doing things a little bit more, timely can again help with safety. Other than that, there's what else is in the course? So we've got the controls lesson. Then we've got moving off and stopping, obviously, left and right hand turns, basic roundabouts. And then within that, I'm also giving them a heads up on what could go wrong, because we all know, as seasoned instructors, you can predict what what's going to go wrong. So again, if the parent knows to look out for that before it happens, everything stays a bit safer. And then I tell them, look, this could go wrong, and if it does, this is what you can do to fix it. I also provide a log, a lesson log. So if they're vigilant and keeping that up to date, they can mark out what they did and when and how many hours they've spent on it, so that when an instructor does come along, because often they'll start the course and then maybe an instructor becomes available, and then the instructor straight away can see, well, okay, mum and dad it looks like they've spent about 5 hours on the road, and that they've made a log here that they've covered this, this and this. So it means it's a little bit less mystery work for the instructor that's picking it up. And perhaps they can spend less time trying to find out what little Johnny knows.
So, what's the feedback been like then from the people that have sort of used that from scratch and then gone through it to use an instructor and so on?
Right. It's been very positive. I remember the first student that I had that had bought the course. It was actually a very rewarding lesson for both of us. So Dad had bought the course. I'd had a long conversation with Dad in the beginning. Told him I had a waiting list, couldn't promise when I was going to be able to start his son. So he said, right, I'll buy your course. He was a fireman, actually, and I'll get started. So that's what happened. And then I think he was probably about halfway through the course when I did have a slot become available, and I took him on. And anyway, first lesson, pitches up, and we're sat there. And straight away, I can go straight into coaching because he's already got some baseline knowledge. So I'm asking him questions rather than telling him things in the early stages. And his confidence, I could see his confidence building and building because he knew the answers. Oh yeah, my dad taught me that because he's bought the course and he did this. And my dad was so worried about telling me the wrong things. But yeah, my dad told me that. And so we were able to get moving so much quicker. We made loads of progress in the first lesson. And I felt my job was a lot easier, in all honesty, as well, because, I taught him by proxy. So the information had all come from me, but he already came armed with it. And I didn't have to waste so much time on the controls and the moving off and stopping. That was just a tick box exercise, really. And then we could move on to other things.
I can imagine how that would be easier because like you were saying about the wealth of videos and stuff that's out there now, and I mean, you might have been a bit more polite than me, but there's some other nonsense out there that gets posted, and I don't. It just frustrates me. I remember I can't remember when it was, back in July, I think it was, I interviewed Graham O'Brien from the DVSA, and he was saying off air about some of the videos that he's seen online, and he thinks that the DVSA needs to, I don't even know if I should say this or not, but he thinks the DVSA should do more around that to actually promote what's expected, because there's some tripe out there. My words, not his. But there is, and I've had that before, and I'm sure you have too, where students come, well, I've seen this on YouTube. I'm like, yeah, but it's well, just get your dad to teach you from YouTube then, or whatever you need to do. But
yes, yeah.
But I've seen you also do. There's a free video you do, teach people how to parallel park, and I think I watched that, and I think it's really good. I liked that, and I think I would trust your course because of that. But
that's nice to hear.
Yeah, it was. I don't know. It just felt like it was being done properly, and maybe properly is the wrong word, because I know there's different ways to do it and so on. But it felt like it was done in the right spirit, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I mean, we all know there's more than one way to skin a cat with parallel park. That's my way. But I find that I get quite consistent results using that formula. And I think the biggest thing with the parallel park as well, and this is one thing that I drill home to my students on manoeuvres, is students and parents will judge the success of a manoeuvre solely based on accuracy. And I think it's so important that they need to shift that mindset a little bit, that it's more about safety. The driving test is about safety. It's all about the observation. It's all about the control and reasonable accuracy. And I think if the parents understand more around what the examiner's looking for in terms of manoeuvres on the driving test, that's helpful as well. So that's my mindset behind that, really.
Yeah, and just on that, with going back to the full course, if you like. So, for example, is that, I think you kind of touched on this before, but would that work for anyone? So, for example, if I get an inquiry tomorrow and say, right, I can't take you on until January, but here's this course, would it work for them to then come to me? Now, I know there's always going to be a slight disparity, because as you said, there might be a few things I would teach differently, but would that still give people a really good grounding? Would it, for them to come to a different instructor?
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, we all maybe phrase things differently. We all have slightly different teaching techniques, but the basics will be in. And what's most important is the bad habits will be minimised. Because I have so many students who come to me and they've maybe been out a couple of times with mum or dad, and the key phrases are things like, "Well, my dad told me to do this, but then he also told me to ask you because he's not sure if he's telling me right." Whereas that takes all that away. The course takes all that away. The parents, they know how to drive, so they've got that basic knowledge themselves anyway. So the course just gives them the reassurance. Brings their skills maybe up to date a little bit, and just gives them the reassurance that what they thought was right is right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Or wrong.
Well, yes. The other thing, and I kind of touched on this before, and I can't think of the right word, so forgive me, but I use the word negative, and I don't mean negative, I mean the perspective. That's the word, the perspective of some people, because we all know what a lot of driving instructors are like. Now, generally, the ones that tend to listen to this show are the positive and super wonderful driving instructors, but there's some out there that are a little bit... You making myself chuckle now, because you referred to little Johnny before. I was about to say negative Nelly. So there you go. Who would see that there's an online course to help parents teach their kids to drive and immediately be derogatory towards it, thinking, well, why would you do that? But then also, why would I give that to my guys? Now, you've touched on that a lot already, but I'm kind of keen to know whether you've come across any negative feedback from anyone, or has it all been positive, and what would you say to anyone that was negative about it?
Well, I certainly haven't come across any negative feedback. I think we need to keep it in perspective that it's not a replacement for professional instruction. It's a complementary tool for those that are interested to do a little bit more at home, because they're going to do it anyway. The ones that are inclined to do that home practice, they are going to do it anyway. So they might as well do it correctly, which makes it easier for us, and it makes it easier for them and safer for them as well. I don't think it's taking away anything from our job. It's just helping the parents that are doing it anyway to do it better.
Definitely. I would agree. I mean, I kind of said before that I like any alternative. I like anything from our industry that is going out and actually trying to do something a bit different that helps learners or helps driving instructors, because I think the great thing you've done there is it's a resource that ADIs and the learners and their parents can use, but it's not something they have to use. It's an option. And I think that when there's something like that, I'm always intrigued by that. But I want to step away from that for a minute, because you mentioned at the start about you for sort of first pass in 2003, and then you came back in 2018 and passed then. I'd be intrigued to know your thoughts on the industry and perhaps is there a difference in the industry or the way ADIs approach industry from 20 years ago to now?
Yeah, I mean, huge. You know, in terms of the training and how we were trained back then compared, to how we are now. As you know, it's all about the coaching now. Before it was all about the teaching. Standards checks and your part 3 was all role play, as you know. So I mean, completely different beast. It was like learning a new job. It wasn't the same job the second time around. So completely different. I certainly think what we're doing now, the way that we do things, is much better. I think generally the instructors that I come into contact with have a lot more professional pride than they used to back in the day. I think there's a lot more networking goes on amongst instructors, things like this. I know I'm a member of quite a few WhatsApp groups, that sort of thing, where everybody supports each other. So yeah, I think the driving instructor community as a whole is a really nice place to be. But I think that the job is a totally different beast now to as it was 20 years ago. I don't know. I feel for me, it's worked out quite nicely that I was able to go through. Not that I enjoyed retraining, but I went through the system, and I've probably had a little bit more in-depth training than I would have done otherwise if I'd have just kind of evolved with the system over time.
I get the impression that you prefer it now to 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah, I think there's been an improvement.
Yeah.
In the way that we teach.
Yeah, I think I've only been in it for 6 years now, and I can kind of see a little shift just over those 6 years in myself as well. I've been quite honest on this show that when I first started, I was very, very reserved and very, a bit sort of 80s, 90s mindset driving instructor, and I've evolved over those 6 years. So yeah. All right then. So I want to ask you now for your ultimate driving song. What song would you bang on when you were bombing down the M1 or wherever you're going?
Well, as a professional driving instructor, of course, I wouldn't be bombing down the M1. But I would say probably maybe Bryan Adams, Summer of '69.
That's a good shout. That's
a nice tune.
Yes. There is a Spotify playlist which you can find in the show notes for this episode, and you can find it elsewhere as well. And that I'm looking forward to adding that one onto that Spotify playlist.
Oh, brilliant! Yes.
I'll send it through to you. Actually, the Instructor on Spotify. I'll send you the link. But yes, if you listen, you can find it in the show notes, and that's a great tune to go on. All right. So, do you want to take a moment to tell people where they can find you and anything else you might have to offer?
Well, yes. The links to my both my courses are on my website. They're also on Linktree on my Instagram account. They're also on Facebook. Obviously I've got the Facebook group. Lost my words. Couldn't find my words. I've got my Facebook group, which is open to anyone, by the way. It's not just for people who've bought the course. That is a Facebook group that is anybody that's a parent or a supervising driver. If they want to join, they're more than welcome to come and join us in there. It's just a forum for parents to thrash out any problems that they've got, ask any questions. I'm in there most days offering advice. If there's any industry news that might be relevant, changes to the highway code or anything like that, I'll stick that on there. So it's a nice, friendly place to be. So anybody, as I say, that wants to join that group, they're more than welcome. If they do join the group, there's also a discount to my boot camp for group members as well. So yeah, come along and join us. But yeah, all my links are on my social medias.
I mean, I haven't done this yet, admittedly, but I think that is probably a good place for instructors to start, when we get parents that are coming asking us questions, because I know that, I say me in the past, a lot of current instructors don't want to deal with that. And I'm not saying whether that's right or wrong, but, we could filter some of those parents through to you and let you deal with those problems on our behalf. It's not a good place to start. All right. So just before we let you disappear, is there anything else you'd like to cover or touch on?
No, I don't think so. Only to say thank you so much for having me. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and it's been quite fun to thrash out some alternative thinkings.
No, and you were a bit nervous before we started, and you were slightly concerned there'd be some long pauses, but before I even edit this show, I can tell you there was none, or possibly one, but very, very few at least. So
That's good to know.
Big thank you for joining us on this episode of The Instructor. I do appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Terry.
So a big thank you to Julie for joining me on this episode of the Instructor podcast. I don't know about you, but I found that really insightful. You heard me on the show talk about something that I've struggled with in the past, dealing with parents. I think I'm in a much better place now. I'm much more accepting, and I'm much more willing to embrace that. I don't think I'm quite as enthusiastic as Julie, but we don't need to be. Everyone's different, and this is one of the things I love about this podcast. It's showcasing different people, and we can take a little bit of Julie's approach, and we can take a bit of Rob Cooling's approach, and we can take a bit of Emma Cottington's approach and mix them all together and become your own unique driving instructor. And that's what I'm trying to do. And again, I'm just going to take a moment to give another shout out to one of my awesome listeners who has left me a review. And this one wasn't just a listener, this one is also a guest. So this review was on Apple, and it's simply titled "So Much Fun," and I'm sure you'll be surprised to hear that it's 5 stars. Now it says, "It's always a privilege to be asked onto Terry's podcasts, combining humour and practical advice. He's an amazing host with honest Yorkshire banter. It's why I call him the podcast king." What a lovely review. I love getting reviews, and that one was from Keir Witherspoon. I've actually worked with Keir a little bit recently. He's helped me out a bit of funk that I was in. Amazing human being. Highly recommend you go check him out. Go check out his podcasts. But it was great that he left me that 5-star review as well. It means a lot. If you would like to leave me a 5-star review and get the possibility of it being read out on the show, Apple is a brilliant place to do it. Facebook, Google, and one of my favourite ones, just drop me a message. Always like getting messages, and I'll start reading some of those out as well. But for now, I'm going to hope you have a brilliant week, and I will let you crack on with your day.
The Instructor Podcast with Terry Cook, talking with leaders, innovators, experts and game changers about what drives them.